everybody, it's Madison. Welcome to our bonus feature. You know, our tagline for Madison on the Air is no Starbucks, no technology, and no one is PC. Well, up until now, the non-PC stuff that appears in these old-timey radio shows has mostly been sexism, which you know I don't let any of these dudes get away with. When adapting the Green Hornet, this was the first time dealing with the racism in OTR in the character of Kato. Steve Junn, who has played many characters over the year for Madison, voiced the role of our Kato, and he and I decided to continue the conversation. For our bonus feature, Steve sat down to have an open and frank discussion about the struggles and successes of the Asian American community in entertainment with fellow professional creatives Andy Lowe, Kelvin and Regullano. Enjoy this hour-ish long conversation full of insight and humor. Take it away, Steve!
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Steve Junn from Madison on the Air. If you all would be so kind as to introduce yourselves and give a little bit of a background, that would be amazing. I guess Kelvin, or if you would like to start.
Okay. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm Kelvin and I'm an actor. I do a lot of television work and some film work, and of course I started in theater. And early in my career, I was involved in a lot of Asian American theater. And in the early formulation of sort of the Asian American voice in drama, and which later became, Asian American film. Starting with indie films, and then to what we have now, and we have Asian American television shows and things like that. So I'm not a famous person. I work. I have a career, and I appear, on television shows once in a while. But I'm certainly not a household name or anything like that. I'm a sort of a working guy.
That's okay. So glad to have you here. Joy?
Yes, hi, I'm Joy. I'm a writer and actor, currently writing on an unannounced animated show at Disney+. Before that, I wrote on an unannounced animated show at DreamWorks. They're very secretive about animation for some reason. And then before that, I wrote on a Netflix kids and family show called The Healing Powers of Dude. And then I'm also an actor. I had some random YouTube short sketches back in the day. And yeah, just random acting gigs. And I guess as far as Asian American stuff goes, at UC Berkeley, I took a few Asian American studies classes. And then I took a slight left and majored in Southeast Asian studies and theater. So lots of theater background as well. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Andy?
Hi, my name is Andy Lowe. I'm the Director of Production and Casting for East West Players. East West Players is the longest-running theater of color in the nation and the largest professional producer of Asian American theater in the nation. Now into our 56th season, I believe. And I am also director, originally from San Diego, where I founded a theater company out there and worked for a number of companies, kind of freelance. But I am here in Los Angeles now with all of you all.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Essentially, what the thing is, I'm not an expert in Asian American history or anything like that. I didn't really know much about this until this discussion, and I started looking into it, but it was a very surface level, first page of the Google search kind of dip into Asians in cinema and in Hollywood throughout the years. And so I just wanted to know what you all thought about it during these times, whether it's personal insight or personal experiences or anything you've studied yourselves or anything like that. And I guess the best jumping off point would be the inspiration for this episode, which is the Green Hornet, which contains Kato, which is sort of like the hero sidekick of the Green Hornet, which is almost kind of this stereotypical, almost like caricature portrayal of an Asian American. And it's not just him. We also have our villain, the German Mannheim, who is also this very over the top caricature of a person. And I guess the first question is, do we believe that this is a positive portrayal, even though Kato is by all means like one of the protagonists? He's like helping the Green Hornet. He's one of the heroes, but is this really a positive portrayal, would you say?
Well, I mean, well, no. First of all, but I mean, it is interesting, right? I mean, you look at the kind of the context of the culture, right? This is probably, I don't know what the exact year that the origin of this script was. I'm going to guess like 1920s ish. If you look at a lot of media at that time, there were a lot of plays and a lot of other stories that were being written where it was kind of just fashionable to have this this kind of quote unquote Oriental houseboy, and in terms of the iconography of that, right, of these butlers or wait staff who have insight and are also exotic. I mean, you can think of like Auntie Mame, I think, had an Asian houseboy. Even like you think about even just like who's it, like Richie Rich or Little Orphan Annie also had like I think a South Asian butler. I mean, this is just kind of like what was fashionable and exotic, and like how people defined cosmopolitan lifestyles of the day, that you had this kind of exotic presence, providing your hero insight, but ultimately was subservient, right? So it's like, there is that, there is that just kind of like that's kind of tells us the mindset of the zeitgeist at the time, right?
I'd like to agree with Andy, and I'd like to sort of go a step farther in defining what the trope is. The trope is sidekick, okay, yeah. and it goes back through literature. I mean, I'm thinking of Don Quixote, okay, and the people that created Green Hornet really did a lot to bring this trope into the and I think that this script is 40s. Am I correct, Steve? Can you?
Yes, the Green Hornet radio show was from the 1940s, actually.
It is 30s, actually. It is 30s where it started.
Okay, where it started, but I believe in the script that we are talking about, that they're even talking about World War II, loose lips sink ships and things like that, right? I think that they're referring to World War, whether it had started for America or not, I'm not sure. But anyway, but what I'm saying is that the trope is sidekick, and even more than sidekick, it's brown sidekick, mm-hmm. And it is absolutely a picture of colonialism. It is a picture of the white male hero, the white savior, and he is being helped and being empowered by and by the by the labor of
the noble savage, right?
The noble savage, yeah. Absolutely. So that's what it is, and to make matters worse, within that picture and that mindset, it is not important that there is authenticity, or even, there is a form of humanity given to these characters, but it
is still the expectations or the wants of the dominant culture, right?
Absolutely. It is from their perspective, and it has nothing to do. There's no need for authenticity, and I just like to put in one thing here, is that the whole reason why we are talking about this script today is because Bruce Lee, in the 1970s, and I'm 60 years old, so I was alive. So I remember the night that Green Hornet came on the air, and I saw this. Okay, and it not only changed my life, it changed Asian America. It changed how we were perceived by the entire country, and it changed our presence in the media. Bruce Lee did it. Bruce Lee was an amazing person, and he, he did a lot of he communicated a lot about martial arts and brought, he kind of invented MMA, mixed martial arts, through Jeet Kune Do, but he also jumped light years ahead the representation and the authenticity of Asians, and particularly Asian Americans. And I think that you were talking about that he speaks that Kato speaks in this broken English. In fact, Bruce Lee speaks in accented English as well, but he's fucking cool, right? When you hear Bruce Lee, because he's being authentic, because he's being himself, and it is something that he had to fight for, and that he had to insist upon. He is the reason why martial arts is even brought into the character. He insisted on bringing his art to his character, and so I'll stop with that. But that is, I just want to say that it is the sidekick sort of trope, and that Bruce Lee, that actor, came in at that time and broke that trope wide open and changed things for Asian America, really. So I'll just leave that there.
I guess I can bounce off of that too, right? Because
please do.
To that point, right? I don't think the producers ever had intention of Kato becoming something more than what he was originally.
Right.
And that kind of brings to point, the importance of not even just authentic representation, but that putting people in these roles that just by force of being there can request or have the agency to say, well, that's not how, this doesn't quite make sense if I say it the way it's written. Mind if I make an adjustment, right? Or if you're Bruce Lee and you're a cocky son of a bitch like he was, you just do it.
Right.
I guess with that, kind of like, Bruce Lee in the late 60s, early 70s, how it just kind of blew up this character, this force. That he was such a personality in and of itself that you start having, other celebrities in Hollywood wanting to be trained by Bruce Lee, his discipline, his style, his whole thing. Because before then, in Hollywood, you really only had characters like Charlie Chan or Fu Manchu, even, just these kind of very stereotypical, almost like propaganda-esque characters.
I think it is interesting to me, I find the concept of Charlie Chan really fascinating, right? Because this is another contemporary image of the same era, right? Kind of born of these pulp novels, gets a translation to radio, and from radio to comic books and other kind of pop media, right? But essentially, you have this character that was sourced from a real person who was a Hawaiian Chinese dude, right? What's his name?
Changapana. Yeah. A real guy. A badass.
Yeah. Like
who carried a bullwhip. Yeah.
And not a gun, and wore a pit helmet, and was a cop in Hawaii. And they kind of built this character based on him. And of course, as he evolved into the pulp fiction, it was more this kind of, ancient Chinese secret. I'm going to use the wisdom of Confucius to solve crime. But it is interesting to me that despite the stereotypical representation, the yellow face performances, this is still essentially a Chinese American character that is allowed to be the central hero, and that is fascinating to me, right? That and I think about even conversations I had with my dad, because he grew up, he was born in 1930, and there was a certain sense of, well, no, it's not accurate, but this is still representation. So I mean,
my parents, my dad liked it, because it was the best that they had, back then. At least he was he's a good guy, and he's the star of the show, and of course what it lacks, and the reason why it's so bad, is because it lacks authenticity. And just going back to Bruce Lee, I just got to say that here, what Bruce Lee brought to the whole thing is he was a good actor. He was a good artist. He right? That's in a quite simple terms. That's what he brings to the game, and all of a sudden, this character explodes and changes everything. But it's only because he comes in there and he says, no, "I'm an artist. I need to tell the truth.
Yeah,
I need to tell the truth." Right, and it's because he does that.
I mean, actually curious for you, Joy. I mean, you're a writer and you're working on a number of shows that are not necessarily Asian American at the heart of them. But I mean, I know you've managed to kind of, work on projects that manage to, in small, subtle ways, do some of this corrective work. I mean, do you have any kind of perspective on this and what we're talking about, like the baby steps that we as artists make?
Yeah, no, totally. It was funny because when Steve first asked the question, "Is this bad?" Like, honestly, I think I was like expecting the worst representation. Like, because I had studied the Green Hornet like briefly in college, I think, and I remembered studying, I think, Kato, but then they pronounce it Kato. But anyway, I think I remember like reading about him in college, but it had been a long time. So yeah, I was like I was expecting like 16 Candles level. So maybe because my level of like expectations were so low, I was like, oh, this actually isn't bad. I mean, it was not great, of course, but I mean, of course, my expectations were like rock bottom. But yeah, I love all you're talking about. Like, there is only so much like humanity you can give a character as a writer when you're writing them from the outside, especially if you've never talked to anybody who had that family or has that heritage or that upbringing. Like, I think Kelvin was speaking to that of like, and that's why Bruce Lee is able to bring so much, because he has a deep well of a life, whereas like if you're writing Kato, and you've never met somebody of that heritage, or you only know one person and you've never asked them what their life is, like, yeah, it's going to feel extremely shallow and limited. It's been the baby steps of it, I guess, is that, I've written on some shows where it's like the show I'm on right now doesn't even have human characters, but we found ways to like we give them names that like, they actually have like human. I can't wait until it's announced, so I don't have to be so weird about it. But yeah, we give them like human names, and some they're allowed to have like names that are like of a heritage. So I've enjoyed being able to choose names that are like specifically sound like they're from somewhere, or like that their parents are from India or from some Latinx place or something like that. So that's been nice to have that cultural specificity.
Now that's interesting in the context, of course. Like, Kato isn't an actual name, right? It's a sound that some white writer said, "Oh, that sounds Oriental." Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even the character of Sulu, right? Like, even Gene Roddenberry has admitted that, like, yeah, I came up with this name Sulu because it sounds a little bit Japanese and a little Chinese, so that way he can represent everyone. Which, in his mind, in that era, is trying to be progressive, and of course it fails in many other ways. From
at least it's not as bad as Hop Sing,
right?
Hop Sing on Bonanza, I think it was, right? You're right. Hop and sing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you talk about that because I think in some ways we think that's progressive today, right? To mash them all together. Like, I don't want to throw any shade because God knows Asian Americans, we tear each other down enough. But, Raya and the Last Dragon or Raya,
Right.
like that was like, here, this is a made up Southeast Asian country. We're going to mash all these cultures together. Like, it's a movie that will unite us all. And it's like, did it? As a Southeast Asian, like, again, I'm so glad it exists, and I don't want to tear us down. But I don't think that was necessarily like. I feel resentful. I'm like, how come Encanto got a movie where it's like about Colombia, like this one specific country, but then Asians, we have to have one movie that we all share, like.
Right, that's just collectively Asian, and that's
We're not
that's
Asian
the label.
X. We're not Asian X, huh? Okay. All right. Okay. I'm an old guy. I got to keep up with all the new. Okay, so not Asian X. Okay.
No, unfortunately. But that does bring an interesting point where, like, it seems that Asian stories are just kind of compiled into just a kind of a wide banner of Asian. Like, you had, and it's not to say that there was any lack of it back then. Like, you had even actors back in, like, the silent film era, like Sesui Hayakawa, who, was started off during the silent film era, got into the talkies, but then his career tanked during World War II from anti-Japanese prejudice, but got a revival in, ironically, acting in World War II themed films, which culminated in a nomination for the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor on Bridge on the River Kwai. I don't know, there's something to that irony of the fact that he lost a lot of work because of the war, but specifically the war-themed films is what brought his career back also.
Yeah, folks, I got to say that I think that there's a difference between representing cultures, different cultures, truthfully and specifically, and representing Asian America. That is a different culture. That is a whole separate culture. And much of my career and much of my work is the characters that I tend to do on television are an exploration of the Asian American man who is woven tightly into the fabric of American culture and American life. Sometimes I play foreigners, but I'm not. I'm best at playing Asian Americans because it's my truth, and I also think it's an important culture to play and to give voice to. Okay, there's a whole discussion being made about these Olympians, these Asian American Olympians, some of whom are now representing China, and China is delighted with some of that, and then some are claiming their Asian Americanness, if I'm not mistaken. They are standing up proudly as Asian American, and well, the Chinese hate that, but I have to love it because I think that there is Asian America, and I know that some people are kind of against that term now, or the hyphen or whatever, or against that term, but there is something to it. There is an Asian American culture, and I think that it's important. It has a history, and as a culture, it is a fusion culture that is an important part of America, and maybe the most important part,
Yes, definitely.
I mean, I think that it's tricky, right? And I know for us at East West Players, right, there are works where I would say every time we cast a piece, we have to kind of walk this balance and make certain decisions, and we talk about this with each director, right? Where it's like, if it is a Vietnamese American playwright and the characters are Vietnamese, should we make great efforts to try and cast Vietnamese actors, or do we feel that the playwright has intended this story about Vietnamese American characters as an Asian American story? And therefore, does that open the door for a Korean American actor or a Japanese American actor to play this Vietnamese American role? And it is a real tricky kind of case by case basis where we I mean, I think
it's such an important question to ask.
It is
such an important, and it's such an important decision and choice to make. It really
and it's
is.
not easy because I mean, there on one hand there is the issue of representation and just like the opportunity for Asian Americans to act. I mean, even for us,
specific Asian Americans to act, especially right when these opportunities come up in culturally specific plays.
Right. Well, and and it's also the thing where like East West Players will do like 4 shows a year. That is maybe about 25 to 30 roles. And and I know there are a lot of people out there that are like, I've been auditioning for East West Players for 20, 30 years. I still haven't made it in. And it's like, and I watch them come in. And I'm like, you're amazing. Please come back. Don't give up. There will be a role for you eventually, but it might take some time because we only have 4 plays a year. That's always that's like the inner turmoil I always deal with. Right. But it is a thing where it's like, it's like, what are we, in which cases are we serving the artist community? In which situations are we serving the community of the story told?
Yeah, it's so that's such a great question. Like what Kelvin is saying. I think one example of like it's so nuanced too is like Amy Hill was on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend as like the Filipino mom, and I think she's half Japanese and half white, I think.
Yeah.
But like she's just she I
believe she is not Filipino at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and like but I mean, me as a Filipino, honestly, I wasn't offended at all. Because it's like Amy Hill's so respected, like a pillar of the community, been around a long time. And when there weren't that many other Filipino actors, like she has done this for many years and she's gotten good at it. Like she learned how to do the accent, and like so for me, like I was like not angry about it at all. I'm like, this is great. She's done the work and she has the resume. She's good at it. Great, like 100% yes. But if it was somebody else that like didn't nail the accent or hasn't been around that long or whatever, like maybe I would feel differently. And for me too, for me as an actor too, I'm like, oh well, of course I'd want to be in Miss Saigon even though I'm not Vietnamese and even though that show is problematic. But then me as a writer, like I have a musical that I wrote about me and about being Filipino, and would I want to cast somebody who's not Filipino? I don't think so. So I mean, I think it's like from all angles, it's like this weird subject.
Such a good point, Joy. And can I just say, as an actor, I came up with Amy Hill. I've known Amy since I was a teenager, and I said before I'm 60 now. But as an artist, as an actor, as an Asian American actor, as an actor who portrays people with Asian faces, I think it's very important for us to immerse ourselves in Asian America and in our shared cultures and all of that, so that we can get as close to other Asian Americans as we can get. Portraying foreigners, portraying somebody of a different nationality, that's a sort of a different thing. But Joy is making the point of Amy Hill, who is quintessential Asian American, and who has a deep, deep well of experience and sharing in Asian America. I came up with her. I know, we those of us at Asian American Theater Company in San Francisco were very, very. We crossed into and shared all of our different Asian American cultures.
Well, I mean, I think also for those of us of a certain age, myself included,
yes.
I mean, I feel like it was funny because I know that amongst my company in San Diego, we would coach each other because we knew that the one Chinatown episode or the one Yakuza episode was going to be coming up and shot in San Diego, every year, and it was a matter of, we are going to be called to represent someone else's community or culture, and we want to do it right because we know there's only a few of us, right? So it's like, yeah. So I mean, in my acting time, I already knew I could do a Kanto accent. My Mandarin accent was crap. I could do a Japanese accent. My Korean was crap. I could do a Filipino accent. So I was ready with my with my Japanese, my Cantonese, my Filipino.
Yes.
But if they asked me to do language, then I was like, I really need a language coach. If I actually have to say words, if it's just accented, then I can work my way through it. But
good for you. What he is saying, my brother, is that as artists, our community is very, very important for our art. It's where we get our ammo, right? It's where we get what we play, right? And so let's just remember that our community is very important to our art, to what we are bringing to the table, and it is very important for us to stay connected with each other, and to have experiences like what Andy just talked about, that we can share, and that we can break bread together and eat our food together, and learn to speak our languages together.
I mean, I've even actually heard Don McGuili, who teaches some of our intro to acting classes here at East West, and he was around since the Mako days, and he even talks about, Mako would do these summer intensives, and where it's like, okay, all the ladies are going to learn a little bit of Japanese fan dance. All the ladies are going to learn a little bit of Chinese ribbon dance, because someone's going to ask you to do it, and you better be able to represent on behalf of these other communities. Every Asian dude is going to have to learn a little bit of martial arts, right? Just so we can, fake our way through it, because that becomes part of the craft, right? I mean,
why are we doing that now?
It's true. It's true. I mean, I think some people do.
Mako was doing that back then. Why are we doing that now? Good Lord.
I guess that does bring up an interesting point that, that us as a collective Asian American community, that we end up having to represent other Asian American communities and the sub communities and so on. But I find it always interesting, mostly through Hollywood, that a lot of the stories that tend to come out when you see, like Andy said, it usually just ends up being like the one Chinatown episode, the one Yakuza episode, like everything that Hollywood likes to put out usually ends up just being boiled down to just a very plain, nice, easy labeled, this is just that one episode. I guess the question I want to ask is, how long or when did you first really experience an audition or a casting or something that really spoke to you as an Asian American? Not just this is just the one episode, the one guest spot, but really this project is for me, an Asian American here in America.
I don't know about the first project, but maybe the first TV project where I really felt seen, because I had auditioned for a lot of general Asians, or I was the Asian choice for a quirky side character. I brought up Crazy Ex-Girlfriend because, humble brag, I was on one episode and I had one line. But yeah, I got to read for a character who was written as Filipino in the script. And so it was so cool. It was the first moment where I was actually called for a network thing to be, so that was the first maybe TV thing that I really felt like, this is awesome.
I think for me, I came up in Asian American theater, And the first film I made in 1985 was A Great Wall. It was the first American film shot in the People's Republic of China, and I played a character who is an Asian American young man, and he's the whole reason why the whole theme of my character is showing the difference between an Asian American kid and a kid born in the People's Republic of China, and this was shot in 1985, and so I think so. I've been lucky enough that my early work was defining Asian American people. One of the first plays I did was FOB with David Henry Wong's play. I did the San Francisco premiere of that play, and plays of Philip Kongo-Tanda's plays, which define Asian America, and some of those plays for the first time defining Asian America. If you're talking about in mainstream television and like that, I think I begin to see a very interesting change in that I am now I book work. I book characters that don't have Asian names. In other words, now I am starting to, because casting directors can't say no to me because that would be racist, my people start to send me out to characters that are not race specific at all. And they're written for it's just a person, and I'm starting to book these, and there's quite a number of, if you look at my resume, there's quite a number of characters that do not have Asian last names at all, and they weren't written as Asian people, and so it puts an Asian American in this sort of non-racialized place. He's your neighbor. He's a first responder. He's a guy that you do business with, whatever it is. So that's sort of my history with portraying Asian Americans.
Okay, so my kind of first. Well, first of all, I remember seeing Kelvin in A Great Wall, and that was a huge, like, crazy thing to see. Like,
you're not even that old. You weren't even born then.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But here's the thing. So I stopped acting around 2002, and that was kind of the point where I was already kind of directing and acting and doing various things, but that was kind of the point where at that point in time, I remember just kind of feeling like the industry was so limited that was the point when I was about to age out of being able to be, a young punk, triad enforcer. And that was my bread and butter, right? So at that time, it was just kind of like, okay, so this is when it cuts off, and there will be nothing left for me until I hit my 40s, when I can be like the triad leader or the Yakuza leader or the guy in the park doing Tai Chi. And so like there was a part of me that was like, okay, maybe I'll come back to acting in my 40s if I, don't quite fall in love with directing, which I did. But it was also the thing where I had been a writer, I had been an actor, I had, directed a lot of stuff for my company. And I definitely just kind of felt like, there was always this stuff where it was like, we need more writers. We need Asian American writers to write our stories. And I kept, as an artistic director of my company, I kept reading all these plays and going, oh, there are a lot of writers. There are writers from the 70s and 80s, like Phil Kankatanda and David Henry Wong and, Viliana Hasa-Houston, Wakako Yamauchi, tons of writers that are better storytellers than I am. And at which point I'm like, but none of these plays are getting second runs. They get their world premiere and then the white theater gets the grant money for doing a world premiere, and then you never see these plays again. There are these classics of Asian American theater that people have never seen a production of, because there's no grant money in second run plays. So that was kind of where I was like, the niche where there is need are directors who will lobby for this work, who will pitch this work, who will champion this work. And that's kind of where I saw myself kind of fitting in the most, or how I could fulfill a need that wasn't already filled with so many other talented folks. In terms of, I think did we go on a tangent? What was the original question again?
Just, when did you first really feel represented?
I'm sorry, I did totally go off on a crazy
right. Like, this was what really hit an Asian American experience. Right.
Sorry. So that's an interesting thing too, is that I had the luck that, while Kelvin was premiering FOB up in the Bay Area, my sister was premiering FOB in San Diego for Pacific Asian Actors Ensemble, which was the company that was in San Diego from 1977 to 1983 and representing Asian Americans and doing Asian American work. So I had also kind of grown up knowing that some of these plays existed. And then, of course, in that whole era after they stopped doing productions until my era in the 90s, there was a dearth of representation, and what I discovered was a lot of Chicano theater, actually, ironically enough. I became very immersed in a lot of like the works of Luis Valdez and Josefina Lopez, and some of the kind of the theater of the oppressed and theater, protest theater of Teatro de Campesino, and I saw actively the power of like some of the work that like the Culture Clash guys were doing, where you were able to completely subvert stereotypes and kind of the slander of the institutionalized slander of our kind of overall American culture, and that was mind-blowing to me, and it was kind of a thing where I'm seeing these Chicano artists and Latino artists who are doing this amazing work, and I'm like, I'm not seeing this in San Diego for Asian Americans, and so that was kind of the interesting kind of roundabout way that I came back to Asian American theater by way of Chicano theater.
I see. That's like really interesting how it just kind of circles back. It's a very community-based thing, especially in with minorities, because more often than not, it unfortunately still happens in Hollywood, you do get a lot of whitewashing, especially in casting and in roles. And so I feel more often than not, a lot of the time, a lot of people, like you said, have to just write their own stuff. Like, they can't rely on Hollywood anymore to write these stories. They have to write their own stories because Hollywood just isn't doing it for them anymore, or never really in the first place.
Well, and of course, as we are starting to get better about it, it's even more importantly the producers and the financiers, right? I mean, this is like what the whole Gold Open movement has kind of really managed to weaponize quite nicely, right? Is that what is the buying power of an Asian American audience that can prove the viability of this market, right?
Definitely. And it brings me to my next point, which is kind of this growing interest in Asian culture. You kind of had it back in the day, maybe like around the 60s, when anime first started being like dubbed and crossed over with Astro Boy and Speed Racer, until anime really boomed in the late 90s, early 2000s with stuff like Sailor Moon, Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z. Then also you had certain films and things just kind of what the industry likes to think is just coming out of nowhere, even though Asian cinema in Asia has a very long history. It's been a very well established thing. You have stuff like Spirited Away winning the Oscar in 2002, or Parasite, or even like Squid Game that has just blown up in recent years. So I just want to think, like, what do you think contributes to this kind of growing interest in Asian culture and Asian media that's being crossed over internationally?
I know, like for us, maybe it's like for us, it's like, I don't know, like why haven't people always been interested? Like I have a resentment about that. Why just now? Why not before?
Right, but it's not to say there was a lack of it, because for a while, and I think it's still happening, there has been like essentially like Hollywood remakes of Asian medias, and kind of like how we had that kind of boom string of remakes of Japanese horror films, or even how we have
Infernal Affairs got remade as whatchamacallit. Oh gosh, what was that? The name of that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and I know what. Yeah.
Well, to Andy's point from earlier, I think you'd made this point about like financiers and producers and stuff. Like maybe like one little inflection point has been Crazy Rich Asians smash it at the box office. So it's like, even though Asians know we have a lot of money and like to go see movies, like Hollywood didn't believe that until they saw Crazy Rich Asians and those box office numbers, and then maybe the powers that be, the deep pocketbooks, were then willing to like go invest more money in these properties and things, perhaps.
I mean, I think actually, you kind of hit a certain nail on the head, Steve, when you were talking about like anime, right? I find it really, so this is the funny thing. I went back to college back in 2009, thinking, okay, maybe I'll finish the degree finally one of these days, but and I ended up taking a ethnic studies class, and of course when the teacher gets to Asian American representation, she starts talking about, okay, what are the stereotypes of, how Asian Americans are kind of attached to nerd culture, and how anime is and manga has like isolated Asian Americans, whatever like that. And I looked around and I realized something. I was much older at that time, and older than almost everyone else in that class. And honestly, I was like, oh wait, I'm the same age range as my professor in this class. So she and I still are operating on, 1990s level stereotypes and stigmas. Like, if I, talked about Robotech with anyone else who I didn't know, I would, get beat up or whatever like that, right? Back in our day. But the kids that were in the class around me had grown up with Toonami. They grew up with Yu-Gi-Oh! And, Power Rangers and stuff. So there was this whole J-pop in Asian pop culture thing that was completely normalized for that generation, basically my niece's generation of kids. And so that was like, in the middle of the lecture, I'm challenging her. It's like, this doesn't necessarily apply anymore because, this generation is acculturated in ways that our generation was not. And, it is again, baby steps. It's little by little. But I mean, I think that is part of what we're seeing now. The shift in market has a lot to do with, as cheesy as the Power Rangers were, with the Red Ranger being played by a guy with, Native American heritage, and the Black Ranger was the Mastodon, and, the Yellow Ranger was the Asian person saying saber-toothed tiger, right? But I mean, ultimately, it still sent the the progressive message that my nieces grew up with, that told them there was no reason why these influences should not be part of their zeitgeist. And I think that is a surprising bit of pavement of foundation for where we are now with Crazy Rich Asians and like this new current boom. I will say that I still feel paranoid and tenuous, right? Because I still remember the boom of Asian American content in the 90s, where like for some crazy reason, within about 6 months, you had the Joy Luck Club, you had Mulan animated feature, you had Dragon the Bruce Lee story, you had Russell Wong on Vanishing Sun on syndicated television, you had Tia Carrera was headlining a show, and then suddenly it was all gone. It all disappeared, and Hollywood decided it was a fad. So I mean, so I look at it like now, it's like it can all disappear. So we have to leverage this what we have now well in order to maintain it, because they will take it away.
Right, I totally get what you mean, and that hopefully is not a fad, and that that right now it's trendy to be diverse or whatever, and that hopefully soon that it's just what it is, because Asian America is still America.
Yeah.
It's not some weird niche kind of topic or anything like that. It's a fundamental part of the experience.
Well, and I think that's also how, I mean, I think the thing that I find most fascinating now is how writers are finding new ways to, it's like you look at kind of the kind of stories told in Asian American theater, 1960s and 70s. There was still a lot of like, am I American? Am I Asian? Oh, my parents are so rough, and or there's like a whole slew of Japanese internment camp plays that that were very big in the 80s, and but there is this generation of playwrights now that, interestingly enough, you can tell they were able to study that foundation of playwrights from the 70s, 80s, 60s, and so forth, and are experimenting with intersectionality in ways that we haven't seen before, where it's like the identity stuff is not the core of the play. I mean, kind of to what Kelvin was talking about, even just in the roles that are popping up now, where it's like, this is a play about queerness and the characters are Asian American, or this is a play about generational trauma, but and the characters happen to be Asian American, right? It's not necessarily. It is both specific and not isolated in the way that work has been in the past. It's fascinating.
We could certainly talk about a lot more things, and our playwrights are exploring different genres. I've been seeing Asian American horror genre being. I've just been seeing a lot of that recently, and other things as well. Asian America is having a significant. Well, we have a presence on television. There's a number of series now that are featuring Asian American stories, kung fu, and I'm going to be I'm involved with a Netflix thing coming up. It's called Partner Track, and based on Helen Wan's a novel of the same name, and that's going to be out maybe in March or something like that. Partner Track. Arden Cho is starring in that, and maybe somebody else can remind me of some of the other. There are some other.
Warrior's another really good one.
Yeah.
What are some of there's some sitcoms too that have. I mean, that's the other interesting thing too. I'm kind of Joy talking about some of the stuff that is happening with the shows that she's working on. But yeah, again, characters that were not necessarily conceived around their ethnic identity, but when they cast the actor is then allowed some agency to self-define, right? Or even like Reggie Lee, when he was cast in Supernatural. Was it Supernatural? No. What was the show that
Grimm? I think was it Grimm?
Grimm. It was Grimm, and he was cast as a sheriff that was not written as a Filipino character. But ultimately, as time went on, he was able to talk to the writers, and they wrote for him to to the point that they actually introduced an aswang in one of the episodes, and kind of introduced some of that Filipino mythology into Grimm's mythology.
That's too cool.
Yes, definitely. So I kind of want to just, as we're kind of starting to finish up here, I just kind of want to touch into like where you all think Hollywood is headed now, because it definitely has its moments in the past. Some are, or a lot of them are not so great, but we're kind of still working on, trying to up the visibility on this Asian American experience, and even just Asians in the industry in general. So I want to know what your thoughts are on like where it's headed in this direction. I know we're kind of on this like kind of trendy rise right now. I want to know like if you think it's something that will last, or it will evolve into something else, or if it will just.
I mean, I kind of feel like there are two things here that are the most important things to me, at least, anyways. Is that these projects that have come up in the last few years have created doorways for people on the executive level, and on the decision-making level to get into places that they can hold a foothold. And secondly, that intersectionality continues to become a focus, right? Because it is still the thing where, a lot of the issues in terms of, I mean, even like this issue now, where the Asian American community is seeing itself very much under attack due to hysteria around, COVID-19, and of course all of the connections with Asian communities and disease that go back to the 1800s somehow are fresh and new again, right? And it still comes down to how do we keep our various communities from being pitted against one another. And a lot of that has to do with the stories that we tell and the mythology we build in our culture around intersectionality of Asian American families telling their story, yes. Telling the story of how the Asian American family, was redlined into an African American neighborhood and became part of that community, and even adopted, elements of culture in order to survive in that community. That's important, right? Same thing with, all of us. I mean, Asian America is intersectionality, right? That's why it's not. That's why ultimately, like, people in China right now are really big on slandering anything Asian American. They were slamming Shang-Chi, they were slamming Nathan Chen, they were slamming Chloe Zhao, because ultimately their narrative is that Chinese in China is the only like recipe for success, and that if you are a Chinese person anywhere else in the world, the fact that you left China means, well, you must be a reject of some sort, right? That is their narrative that keeps their people, self-sustaining. And that's the narrative that, the new strange narrative that we are ultimately going to be fighting against, right? And that comes with kind of solidarity with our other American communities.
Steve, can I just sort of speak to your statement about where we're at right now? And I've been an artist for 30, 40 years, and I have never seen a time when there is so much opportunity for us and for us to tell stories of any kind. What has happened in streaming and on the storytelling power and opportunity is television, streaming. It's on the screens. There is so much content that is needed, and there's so many holes to be filled. There is so much content to be filled, and I just think that the opportunity to tell whatever story you want to tell is right now, and certain people are taking those opportunities, and that I'll leave it at that. That's where I think we're at right now.
Yeah, I feel optimistic as well. Like, just the fact that I'm in an animated writers room. When I was in college and in my internship at an animation studio, like, all three of the writers and the EP were all white guys, and so the fact that I'm in a writer's room feels nice. The fact that so many of my friends who are POCs and they're staffed, and so that's speaking to behind the scenes, or behind the camera a little bit, and then and as an actor too, like the fact that my experience was like I actually like didn't have the experience where I auditioned for like a lot of. I don't think I hardly ever auditioned when I first started out, or even now for characters that have accents. It's like pretty rare actually. So like even that experience feels different from maybe somebody who is coming up, 10 years before me or something. And of course, with Shang-Chi and Crazy Rich Asians and stuff, it does feel like there is now a belief that Asian stuff can make money, which I do have a resentment. Why did it take that? But but like Andy said, it could. Who knows what'll happen? But I feel generally optimistic, and the more of us that are entrenched, because it takes time, right, to like replace the old power structures. Because yes, I've been in writers' rooms, and me and the other women / women of color were the lower level writers, right? And the head writers are still white, or the EP is still white, or whatever. So it takes time, I think, to like move into the higher power structures, and even to have development execs and like series execs and stuff. Like I am slowly seeing more people of color, but I think it takes time for that to trickle up. But I see it happening, so I feel generally optimistic.
Well, and I just want to bounce off of some of both of what you guys are saying too, right? Is that, the reminder that, Asian American stories are American stories. Asian American stories are queer stories, are stories about women, are stories about African Americans, because we often get a lot of narratives about mixed race that are still on this Asian white paradigm. They are stories about Latinx, and there is so much intersectionality and specificity and diversity to still be explored, and I think that is that specificity. I think I said that wrong. That is going to be what makes this stick and what makes it honest.
Speaking to Joy's comment about people in the upper echelons of power in Hollywood, just want to make a point that both Kung Fu and Partner Track are the showrunners are Asian American women, and they're also doing the writing as well. Asian Americans in the writing room as well. Just want to make that point. And so
that's a good
things
point
are changing.
Sure.
Yeah, things are. I'm agreeing with everything that you said, Joy, and I'm just adding to that and saying that we're starting to crack it.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, like Cleaning Lady has like a Asian female showrunner for sure. There's
yes,
absolutely.
Yes.
And like Deb Chow, who is heading up the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, is Asian American. Even you can see the touches that Tamara Morrison leading up the Boba Fett series have affected this fantasy science fiction world, where you can see little touches of his indigenous roots as a Maori man, kind of affecting and influencing how they tell the stories of Tusken Raiders as indigenous peoples of the planet Tatooine, right? It is fascinating and kind of amazing that we have this platform and can use these platforms in the way that we are able to now.
Yes, definitely. I think ever since the advent of the internet and this accessibility to like other stories, and to also be able to present these stories to a much wider audience, to the general public.
Yeah, we have. As I said, I'm an old man, and it just blows my mind that the kind of access that we can have now to mass media, to mainstream media. Look, it's still not enough. It's still not where it should be, but I'm seeing opportunity now that I'd never seen in my entire career, in my entire life. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm certainly not famous, and there just weren't opportunities for most of my career, there just weren't opportunities out there for me to excel and get big. But I'm seeing so much opportunity for storytelling now, especially as I said before, on the small screen, on streaming, and on.
And of course, where this comes down to, and of course, I think a lot of maybe your listeners and other audience members are out there. It's like, where I'm not necessarily creative. How can I do my part? How can I help? It's engage in this media, right? I mean, and particularly on the grassroots level, like go see Joy's play. It is hysterical.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of Joy's, and I've been watching her grow, and so go find Joy's play. Go see a show at East West Players. Find the spaces where Asian Americans are able to self-define. Go see a show from Artists at Play. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff here in Little Tokyo. I mean, I always refer to Little Tokyo as kind of what Harlem was to jazz, is what Little Tokyo has been for Asian American artists. You have East West here. You have the longest running open mic poetry open mic in Tuesday Night Project here. You have the only Asian American museum that is affiliated with the Smithsonian. There is so much culture here that you can support, engage, and help these creative move to the next level just by showing the demand for it.
Yeah, and I just want to add a quick point to that. Like, also excel at whatever you excel at. Like, Marie Kondo being awesome at cleaning means that now people get to play Marie Kondo, in the next biopic, or being an awesome snowboarder. Now there should be a movie about that. So yeah, totally.
Yes, definitely. And I think, on that note, I think we are out of time for today. I want to thank you all so much for joining me on this conversation today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Of course, or if you all had any last-minute closing remarks before, please feel free to go for it.
Well, come see East West Players' production of Assassins. This is a musical by Stephen Sondheim, who recently passed away. It is running through March 20th, I believe, unless it extends, and hopefully it extends. But this is an opportunity to see a lot of people of color in roles that weren't necessarily written for Asian Americans, but take on new levels of meaning when they are portrayed by people of color.
Woo!
Alrighty, sounds amazing. Assassins at East West Players. Oh, show! I'm gonna write that down right now, actually.
Support storytelling. Go hear stories. Storytelling is the most important thing that human beings do. Go hear stories in any way, in any form that you can. Read them, hear them, watch them, tell stories.
Big thank you to Steve Jun, Andy Lowe, Kelvin Han Yi, and Joy Regullano for this fabulous discussion. To learn more and connect online with our amazing guests, as well as to the East West Players, go to our website, MadisonOnTheAir.com, to the page for our bonus feature, Kato and the History of Asian Americans in Hollywood. Thanks for listening!